have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And in the news this week, well, we all heard this week that poet Adrienne Rich, a lesbian feminist artist, activist, and icon, has died at the age of 82. We're going to remember her tremendous contributions to literature and to our society.
Meanwhile, in political news, this week residents of Anchorage, Alaska went to the polls to vote on a ballot measure to protect people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. We don't have the vote results because we're taping on Tuesday. But before it was over, the opposition ads got really ugly. We'll show you one of them and a reply from our side.
Non-citizens of this country who are in binational relationships are filing suit against the United States to overturn the Anti-Gay Defense of Marriage Act.
These challenges are just popping up everywhere. Mitt Romney, this will not be a surprise to anyone, gave $10,000 through a sort of secret meandering passage, so to speak, to the Anti-Gay National Organization for Marriage. You've heard of them. He's not asking for it back, even though the group's racially divisive strategy has now been revealed.
Miss Universe Canada has reinstated the transgender contestant that we told you about last week who had been barred from the competition.
Without any comment from Donald Trump. How did that happen? A group in Liberia in Africa has published a hit list, literally a hit list of gay rights supporters they intend to kill.
The gay man in Santiago, Chile, who was so brutalized there, has died from that attack.
On an entirely different note, the Disney musical Newsies has opened on Broadway with a new book by Harvey Fierstein. Andy has a review of this and the revival of Jesus Christ Superstar.
And Martina Navratilova was the first one sent home from Dancing with the Stars.
I'm afraid she just didn't have the rhythm on the dance floor.
Okay. Well, somebody who did have rhythm and lots of other things was Adrienne Rich.
Yes, Adrienne, take your pick. But she died last week at the age of 82. Yes, of rheumatoid arthritis. It's hard to describe how important and powerful she was, especially in the days of the second wave of feminism in the 70s. She was the seminal voice. And as the New York Times obituary pointed out, her book, Snapshots of a Daughter-in-Law, came along in the same year as Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, and both were just explosive in their deconstruction of sort of the horrible, boring housewives'
quite
life.
Controversial. I mean, she started out, she was, privileged, went to Radcliffe, was sort of discovered by W.H. Auden. So
while she was still at Radcliffe,
right,
and was published by him.
So she had a fairly, and her tastes in poetry, fairly conventional and things like that. And then she changes as the world changed, and she changed the world.
Exactly. Let's take a look at her for a couple of minutes, and then we'll talk a little more about her. This is her talking about herself and reading a little poetry.
I think that I began writing poetry as a very young child, and as a young girl I began to take it seriously. The poetry that I knew, that I had studied, that was available to me, was not even the modernist poets. It was very traditional, very formal. And it wasn't until I went to college that I began to read what is now known as modern poetry. And that was a kind of revelation to me. And that was a sort of first point at which I began to think there are other ways of writing. than the ones that you have learned to use. And poetry was always, for me, a kind of probe into the unspeakable, because it was a way of speaking indirectly about things I couldn't speak directly about.
Adrienne Rich burst on the literary scene in the 50s, a passionate political activist, feminist, Adrienne Rich, who said, "Art means nothing if it simply decorates the dinner table of the power which holds it hostage."
There's a place between two stands of trees where the grass grows uphill and the old revolutionary road breaks off into shadows, near a meeting house abandoned by the persecuted who disappeared into those shadows. I've walked there, picking mushrooms at the edge of dread, but don't be fooled. This isn't a Russian poem. This is not somewhere else, but here. Our country, moving closer to its own truth and dread, its own ways of making people disappear. I won't tell you where the place is, the dark mesh of the woods, meeting the unmarked strip of light, ghost-ridden crossroads, leaf mold paradise. I know already who wants to buy it, sell it, make it disappear. And I won't tell you where it is, so why do I tell you anything? Because you still listen. Because in times like these, to have you listen at all, it's necessary to talk about trees.
So she married a man, she had 3 sons, and then in the 70s she became more conscious of her love for women.
And she was with the writer Michelle Cliff for the last 30 years. And and she came out, which was remarkable in those days.
She came out in a book, 21 Love Poems in 1976, which was considered very daring at the time.
For prominent people.
Yes.
I was out at that time.
It's the year I came out. She also wrote a nonfiction book in that year, Of Woman Born, which was quite revolutionary. She had won the National Book Award in 1974, along with Allen Ginsberg, but she refused to accept it as an individual award, and she went up on stage with the other finalists, who were Audre Lorde and Alice Walker.
How about that? And she also was famous for not taking an award from the President of the United States. It was, I believe, Clinton at the time.
Yes.
It was from the National Endowment for the Arts. And she said that because of the increasingly brutal impact of racial and economic injustice, she wasn't going to take an award from her government.
That had chosen to honor a few token artists while the people at large are so dishonored.
Right.
She also was very famous for an essay called Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence. I really recommend that you look up Adrienne Rich's writings. They're very powerful. She was a very powerful and yet gentle person, personally.
And she also said poetry is not a healing lotion, an emotional massage, a kind of linguistic aromatherapy, but neither is it a blueprint nor an instruction manual, not a billboard. So very thoughtful, a great artist.
She also won a MacArthur Genius Grant.
Yeah.
And was also famous for the book Diving into the Wreck in 1973. So check out Adrienne Rich's writing. She was a giant and extremely influential.
Right.
All right, moving on to non-giants like Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney. Mitt, it was discovered this week, not as a huge surprise to anyone, because I think he has bragged about his opposition to Proposition 8 and his support of the effort against it. But it turns out that he actually gave $10,000 to the National Organization for Marriage through a political action committee in Alabama. This was an amazing manipulation, but the rules were loose, and that's how he managed to make that donation.
And a lot of groups are calling upon these candidates to dissociate themselves from the National Organization for Marriage because of their racially divisive strategy that was uncovered. But Maggie Gallagher says she's completely proud of her strategy, and that's politics.
So does Brian Brown. But the release of this memo last week that revealed their strategy of dividing, as they say, gays and blacks, thereby leaving out everyone who is gay and black, has been a boon to healing rifts, I think, between the LGBT community and communities of color. And leaders of the NAACP all over the country, state organizations and the national organization, the National Council of La Raza, even black pastors who are anti-same-sex marriage are coming out and condemning NOM for their strategy.
Well, and I'm also pleased to see that a huge coalition of LGBT groups is speaking out on the Trayvon Martin issue,
yes,
calling it a national call to action and urging the authorities, of course, to get justice in this case. But it's good that we're weighing in on these things because, justice denied one is justice denied all.
Well, the strategy is always divide and conquer from the right-wing people in power, and the more we let them divide us, the more problem we have. And I despair of people who want to push a single-issue approach to things.
Right.
It's
and we're always asking for the support of other groups for
exactly,
our cause.
Exactly.
That means we do have to weigh in on their issues as well and see all these connections.
Well, and which are also our issues. And when people hear some issue discussed and say, well, what's gay about that? Well, excuse me, are we human beings who are part of the race, and the human race that is, and need to support all people's health and well-being? Yes, I would say.
Right.
But Rick Santorum doesn't think that because he was bowling in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
And a boy reached for a pink bowling ball, and he said, "You're not going to use the pink ball. We're not going to let you do that. Not on camera."
Friends don't let friends use pink balls.
Woo. He is just, he is one sick dog.
He is. It's a sickness. And as someone pointed out, he's a bully.
Yeah.
If this is the way he talks, he is a downright bully. And he went after the New York Times reporter. That was pretty bullying, too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, in other political news, the governor of Rhode Island, Lincoln Chafee, who is a former Republican who deserted his party because they were too right-wing, is supporting the re-election of the out-gay Democratic congressman.
He says he's an honest guy.
Not everyone would agree.
David's had a little trouble up there, but he is an out-gay candidate, and we certainly don't want to lose that seat up in Rhode Island.
David.
To the Republicans. And that's what...
Cicilline.
Cicilline, yeah.
Cicilline, thank you.
And Corey Johnson, who occasionally co-hosts on this show, has announced his run for city council in New York.
Sort of. He's announced the formation of his exploratory committee.
Okay. I think every candidate in that race is going to be gay.
Yes.
There's going to be a whole slew of them. We're not taking sides.
Yeah.
We love. We know. Okay.
But we are taking sides in Anchorage, Alaska, although this vote has now happened and we don't know the outcome. They are voting on a non-discrimination ordinance for the city of Anchorage.
This is brought by our side.
Well, the local legislature passed one of these a few years ago, but the mayor vetoed it on the grounds that he didn't think there was any discrimination in Anchorage.
Well, if you don't think there's discrimination, all you've got to see is the ads that are being run by the other side.
So they just had this campaign. Our side figured it was time to go to the ballot with this. And there were some naysayers among our side, but the last we heard as the vote was taking place as we're taping was a guy on our side who was an activist saying, I was skeptical about this, but I think we may actually win this. We'll see.
We'll see. But
the right-wing side that was opposing Proposition 5 put together a few ads that were cartoons that were all about scaring people about transgender people being given any kind of rights or access. And they're really disgusting ads, so we thought you'd certainly want to see one of them.
Steve owns a gym in Anchorage. But if Proposition 5 passes, Steve will be forced to open the women's locker room to anyone who claims a female identity. If Steve says yes, he'll lose customers. And if he says no, he can be fined or imprisoned. Anchorage is already a tolerant city. Vote no on Proposition 5. This message paid for by Protect Your Rights. Vote no on Prop 5. Top donors are Protect Your Freedom, No on 5, Josh Pepper, and Chapel by the Sea.
It looks like a South Park episode.
There are a lot of misstatements in that ad.
People don't go to jail for discriminating in that way.
No, and transsexual women or men do not present in the way it's depicted in that ad.
Exactly, and I don't know. I mean, I think that's going to offend people. I hope that will offend people.
Well, we will see where this turns up, but our side, being disgusted and offended by those ads, and there were a series of them, put together this ad in reply.
My name is Drew. I'm transgender. I was born female, but I've lived fully as a man for many years. It's offensive when people like me are portrayed as a cartoon, or worse yet, someone to be feared. Discrimination is dehumanizing. No one should be fired just because of who they are. I'm a real person, and like all people, I should have real legal protections. Vote yes on Prop 5.
This ad paid for by One Anchorage. The top contributors of One Anchorage are Tim Gill, Planned Parenthood, and the Pride Foundation.
I'm quite fascinated by the fact in Anchorage you have to list who the major donors are for all these campaigns.
They should do that everywhere.
Great. Yeah,
they
great.
should do that everywhere. Well, did you know that Jesus was not a homophobe?
Yes.
There's a kid in Cincinnati, is it? Yes. Anyway,
Waynesville, Ohio.
Who his name is Maverick Couch. He's an openly gay junior there, and he was threatened with suspension for wearing a T-shirt that said "Jesus is not a homophobe."
A year ago.
But the reason that the principal gave was that this was sexual.
Sexual in nature and therefore indecent and inappropriate. He was wearing it for the Day of Silence, the Glisten Day of Silence. It was the Christian fish with a rainbow design on it, and Jesus is not a homophobe.
Yes, they call that the ichthus, or sign of the fish.
So Maverick wanted to wear it again this year, so he asked and he was told he couldn't. So now he's filed a lawsuit.
With Lambda Legal's help,
yeah.
They sent a letter to the principals saying, this is stop
speech.
Stop.
Well, usually the principals say you can't wear something like that because it will be disruptive, but this principal is so stupid that he didn't even know to come up with that. He just called it sexual. I doubt he'll win.
Right.
Also, Immigration Equality, the national organization that works for rights for non-U.S. citizens trying to get asylum or get spousal privileges here, has filed now a federal lawsuit suing for green card equal protection for married same-sex couples where one member of the couple is a U.S. citizen and one is not. They are challenging the Defense of Marriage Act's refusal to acknowledge these marriages.
They said, we didn't want to do this, but you gave us no choice.
Well, there are couples who had already sued individually in Illinois and California, but this is a national suit with 5 couples, and it's yet another way to attack DOMA. And I'm just, this week we're hearing the arguments in the Federal Appeals Court in Boston on the challenge to DOMA there.
And you can see or listen to that, I think. You can listen to that by going to Prop 8 Trial Tracker. That's the website, prop8trialtracker.com, the DOMA trial.
In Boston, and we're asking for a similar hearing before the Ninth Circuit in California. We're just coming at DOMA in all these different ways, and it's like there's a critical mass of people who have finally decided, 15 years after DOMA was passed, that now is the time that we can go after it. There's enough.
Yes, and the only people defending it are the House Republicans because the president won't defend it. So keep that in mind when you're voting this year.
It's Representative Boehner and the bipartisan legal advisory group that works for the House of Representatives that is having to defend DOMA, I think, in 22 jurisdictions now.
They're keeping them busy. Your tax dollars at work.
Well, Representative Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and Barney Frank and Tammy Baldwin and Jared Polis and David Cicilline have all complained to Boehner. They've written him a letter saying, hey, you're going too far in defending DOMA. This goes beyond your jurisdiction in funding all these lawsuits to defend DOMA. And he, of course, is saying, leave me alone.
They're using that guy Paul Clement in a lot of these cases, who's the same one who's the same one who argued against the Affordable Health Care Act in the Supreme Court, which wasn't looking good. We didn't talk about that yet, but William Eskridge, who's a gay lawyer, said he thinks that Roberts and who's the other new one?
Alito?
No, not Alito. Roberts and Kennedy, I'm sorry, the old one.
Yeah.
Roberts and Kennedy won't,
so you tricked me.
Won't want to go so far. But you got the new one, Alito. He's a bad guy.
Well, the president is predicting that they won't overturn it, but we'll
rhetoric.
see. Meanwhile, a great decision from a judge in Minnesota. There have been a variety of decisions about transgender people's right to marry members of the opposite sex from their current gender.
In some states, you are considered the gender that you transition to and are certified as. In other states, you are only, for the rest of your life, no matter what you do, you are the gender that you were designated with at birth. I wouldn't even say the gender you were born with, because who the hell knows?
Which leads to some interesting anomalies where courts have actually legalized same-sex marriages by refusing to acknowledge opposite-sex marriages.
Right.
I don't know. It's confusing. But here's the case in Minnesota. A couple are married, Calvin and Christine Radke. Calvin works for UPS, and his wife, Christine, is a transgender female.
Man to woman.
Yes. Surgery, certified by the state, birth certificate changed, officially, legally, all purposes female.
And since Minnesota has a law against same-gender marriage, Christine is unable to marry a woman.
And is legally married to Calvin. So Calvin is a UPS driver, and Christine is on his health plan as his wife.
But she is.
Yes, exactly. So the UPS health plan, a union health plan for drivers of UPS, finds out somewhere down the road in Christine's medical records that she is transgender. And they say, whoa, wait a minute. That means she was born a man, and we are not going to recognize her as Calvin's wife because clearly this marriage is illegal and not to be recognized because of the Defense of Marriage Act.
But didn't a lawyer tell them that's not the way it works? And it doesn't have anything to do with the federal definition of marriage?
I don't know what their lawyer told them.
Because there's no federal definition of gender.
Look, this is them getting their little minds out of order and saying, we don't like this, we're not recognizing it, we're not doing them. And by the way, you can repay us $80,000 in health care costs.
The judge didn't like that.
The judge didn't, not only did the judge not like that, but the judge in the case, because Calvin and Christine went to court, said, you are out of your friggin' minds. The state of Minnesota has recognized this woman as a woman. It is completely legal. You have no right to decide on your own definition of who is what. These people are legally married. Leave them alone. You are out of bounds.
So they back off?
Well, we'll see where they go with this.
Are they trying to appeal?
But it is shocking that a union health fund would try to do this, and fantastic that the Minnesota judge made this decision.
All right. We want to remind you again that there are a bunch of ballot initiatives on same-sex marriage this year, but the first one is coming up very soon on May 8th in North Carolina. And this is the only southern state that doesn't constitutionally ban same-sex marriage at this point, even though they have a law against it. But in the latest poll, 6 out of 10 people in North Carolina oppose the amendment to the state constitution that prevents same-sex marriages. Now, when you dig into the poll, 38% say they support full marriage rights, 29% oppose any legal recognition for same-sex couples, and support for same-sex marriage, for civil partnerships or civil unions, but not full marriage, was at 29%. But this ballot initiative bans those things.
For opposite-sex couples, too.
Right.
Any kind of domestic partner benefits.
So North Carolina, come through. Be the first state after Arizona voted the first time.
There are a lot of predictions going
these things.
Both ways on this initiative, and I must say I'm confused at this point. Traditionally, everyone would believe that in North Carolina they would have no problem passing a constitutional amendment.
They voted for Obama.
Yes, and they voted for a Democratic governor. And the fact that she is not running for re-election and there will be a Democratic primary on this ballot is a great thing for us because Democratic voters will now come out. It's not just a Republican primary. But, man, I don't know.
Right.
But we'll see. Anyway, update on Camdenton, Missouri, where the school district has settled with the ACLU and will remove the website blocks that kept pro-gay sites from being accessible to students while allowing anti-gay sites through.
We always win these cases.
And
all you have to do is speak up about them.
The British web censor who was creating these blocks has changed the settings and is allowing the gay sites through.
Well.
Thank you.
Do you remember that guy in who worked for the Michigan Attorney General's office, Andrew Sherville?
Yes, who was stalking the gay student body president.
Yes. Well, a state hearing officer has upheld his firing in 2010 as an assistant attorney general because he was doing that harassment, and now he lives in North Babylon, New York, out on Long Island. So he's come here to torture us.
Oh, boy. Well, the Catholic Bishop of Worcester, Massachusetts, Bishop McManus, is torturing us all. He has forced Anna Maria College in Massachusetts to disinvite Vicki Kennedy as the graduation speaker.
Victoria Kennedy, and
widow of Ted Kennedy.
This is about abortion or gay or whatever. It's just insane.
Don't you have better things to do with your time?
When are they going to modernize? Maybe about the same time the Republican Party modernizes.
Yeah, don't hold your breath. But good news from Canada, where the Miss Universe pageant there has reinstated transgender contestant Jenna Talikova.
There she is.
She was
initially barred because they said you had to be born a woman.
Yeah.
But there are laws, I guess, in Canada protecting people on this basis, and they
still have to go through some details to make sure she meets the requirements. But she had surgery 4 years ago. Whether she should be required to have surgery to participate is a whole other question. Right. But she did, and so it looks like she's back in the pageant. And I am shocked, I tell you, that Donald Trump had nothing to say about this. But evidently, he doesn't want to get in on this. That's about the only thing he hasn't wanted to comment on in years.
Oh, by the way, this year is the Harry Hay centennial. Harry Hay is the guy who founded the Mattachine Society with a bunch of his confreres out there in Los Angeles in late 49, 50, basically. And so is one of our forefathers, of course, is no longer with us. But they're going to start, you can go to, did I give you this? Yes. You can go to onearchives.org, onearchives.org, and read about the things that are happening. There's going to be something on Saturday, April 7th at the outside the house where Harry lived. To dedicate the Harry Hay Steps, the Mattachine Steps. Mattachine, of course, being the group that he founded. They're going to have all kinds of forums and things around the country for Harry. There's going to be stuff here in New York as well through the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies at CUNY.
And someone who's still alive who is being honored on the West Coast, Hank Plant, the retired KPIX San Francisco reporter, is getting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Associated Press. He was maybe the first out gay mainstream TV reporter. He was out on the air for about 35 years. and a terrific reporter. So congratulations to Hank Plant.
And sticking on the 100 theme, Jonathan Ned Katz, who is a gay historian who writes about gay history forever, since I was a kid, has found a connection to the 100th anniversary of the Titanic and gayness by digging up the fact that one of the guys who died was painter Frank Millet, M-I-L-L-E-T. So if you go to outhistory.org, you can read the transcriptions of his love letters to Charles Warren Stoddard, who started a sexual affair in Venice in 1875. So, but his point in well, of course, anything for a hook, and everybody is going to be talking about
I just don't think it's shocking that people were gay in 1875.
Not gay, but one of the things that he says here is that this is before people had a lot of language around. I mean, even the word homosexual had not been coined at the time. So, that people had all these things and that kind of stuff. It's interesting.
Okay.
We didn't invent homosexuality, is the point.
No. Interesting story from the military. A young gay man went to basic training at Fort Benning, I think in Georgia, and was brutalized by his drill sergeant. He was sort of spotted as gay, and this guy kept calling him a faggot and a fruit and saying, tell me who the other fruits in the troop are, and was throwing rocks at him and really beating him up. So finally, his straight comrades stood up to the drill sergeant and turned him in, and the company commander got furious at this, and the drill sergeant is now being court-martialed.
Hooray.
Exactly.
Before he would have been given a medal.
Well, I don't know, but...
He weren't even supposed to do that under Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
I'm sorry this guy had to go through this, but it is a great story of the system working.
I talked to African Americans who served in the Vietnam era and were called the N-word all the time and things like that. This was, 20 years, 30 years after the integration of the military.
Sure.
And things will never be perfect. And now the military academies are starting their LGBT groups, yes?
Exactly. All of them. We don't know about the Air Force Academy, but the Coast Guard, West Point.
Of right-wing Christianity.
But not the sports club in West Manchester Township, Pennsylvania, where the owner denied a family discount to a lesbian couple with a child. There's no non-discrimination law there, although there is in nearby York. He said, I have to draw the line somewhere.
Oh my God. Well, we tell you about terrible things all over the world and gay bashings and things like that. And we read about this one just this week, although it happened back in February. A guy named Yannis Delatolis in Brooklyn, in the Gowanus section of Brooklyn, trendy, goes to a place called Mission Dolores, which is a gay-friendly bar there. And he goes there all the time because they let him bring his dog into the thing. And, some guy cuts him off online when he's trying to get a drink, and they have a little confrontation, and the guy starts spewing all this anti-gay stuff. He goes to sit down, and then he goes back to the guy and says, it's really not cool to do that here. And the guy's friends start to beat the crap out of him. I mean, bash his head in. The worst thing about the story is that he's looking for witnesses for this, and everybody averts their eyes and runs away.
The security guard is the only one who stood up for him.
He said that the Mission Dolores place has been very helpful, but not the other customers. And folks, we're all in this together. If we're going to stop any of this stuff, bullying, all that kind of stuff, bystanders have to stand up and get involved.
Well, instead we have the example of House Majority Leader Boehner, who appointed one of the co-founders of the National Organization for Marriage, Robert George, the really horrible right-wing professor at Princeton. How he survives there, I don't know. To something called the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which now makes him a government employee.
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
God.
Well, at least the government for the moment is welcoming gay people. The Family Equality Council has been invited once again to participate in the annual Easter egg roll on April 9th. It's the 134th edition.
And the White House is holding one of its now periodic LGBT conferences, this one on families, on April 28th in Minneapolis. This is mostly an election year stunt, but they've held one on health and one on education education and this one on families, and it's a way for them to show off their LGBT-friendly policies. But, better that than rejecting us.
What kind of conferences is the Romney administration going to sponsor?
Exactly.
Maybe on religious freedom.
And speaking of government employees, although I don't know if he's employed or an intern, but 17-year-old activist in Phoenix, Caleb Laski, has been put to work as a diversity liaison and anti-bullying activist by the mayor of Phoenix. So, Caleb, congratulations.
Great.
He's been quite aggressive.
Right.
All right. Moving on to international news.
Sure.
Very sad news from Santiago, Chile. We told you about Daniel Zamudio, who had been really brutally attacked by self-identified neo-Nazis who carved swastikas in his stomach and cut off part of his ear and and he died. He was in a coma for a long time. It is huge news all over South America, so that's the good part of it, but it's a terrible, terrible
Yes, things
loss.
are getting out of hand out there, and of course we tell you about it happening in Africa a lot, and now it's Liberia. They've got an anti-gay group there called MOGAL, which is Movement Against Gays in Liberia, and they have distributed flyers with a hit list of people, not just gay people, anybody who supports gay rights.
Names.
And they are threatening to get them, quote, one by one. Now, the president of Liberia is the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Now, she is not going for these new laws that they want to pass, which want to make things worse for gay people, but she's also not backing off on keeping their anti-sodomy law there.
Well, this is an ongoing discussion you and I have. Is she right to lie low and not make things worse, or is her refusal to stand up to them more vociferously giving them license?
It would be nice if there was a quote in this story by her saying, "This is un-African. This kind of intolerance." Listen to one of the representatives of this group. We're going to get them one by one. They, gays, or people who support gay rights, want to spoil our country, and there should be dangerous punishments, flogging, and death. And people are being targeted, being given death threats already by this. People's family members are afraid to speak out. It's just, they said they're going to be taking action very shortly. We urge them also to begin saying their Lord's prayers. Say the Lord's Prayer. Why don't you take Christianity to heart and stop treating people so horribly?
Sad. Better news from Argentina, where same-sex marriage is legal and where people who are not Argentinian will also begin to be able to be married in Santa Fe province, at least, and possibly across the country.
Okay.
Hard to even say that after the story from Liberia. The other international news story we came across this week was a report from the Associated Press, which happened upon President Obama's old nanny from Indonesia, who I think we've heard before was transgender.
Right.
And so they interviewed her and did a little story on her that you can find on Huffington Post. Evie is her name. And here's the Associated Press interview with President Obama's former nanny.
66-year-old Evie walks the streets of her Indonesian slum. She lives in a tiny room, subsisting on money she earns from washing clothes. Evie's meager existence belies a startling truth. She was once nanny to President Barack Obama. Evie says she's always been proud that the person she cared for, drove to school, and cooked for ended up being #1 in the world. The future president was just 8 years old at the time. In the late 1960s, his mother, Ann Dunham, married her second husband and moved to Indonesia. Dunham was impressed by Evie's cooking ability and offered her a job. For 2 years, Evie lived with Obama and his family in this Jakarta home, but she thinks the young Obama didn't know one fundamental truth about her. Born a man, Evie identifies as a woman. Evie says Ann Dunham might have known she was transgendered, but she never dressed as a woman in front of young Barry. And it was a time of brutal dictatorship, when soldiers would beat and round up so-called banshees. Evie says soldiers once shaved off her long black hair and burned her with lit cigarettes. Even today, transgendered people have a difficult time in this largely Muslim nation of 240 million people. This representative of an influential Islamic group says transgendered people are wrong, and they deny the teachings of Islam. And so, Evie has struggled through life, saying she's never found suitable work since Obama and his family left the country in the early 1970s, but she says Obama's election gave her a reason to feel proud for the first time in a long time. Matt Friedman, Associated Press.
Well, she even got involved in sex work at one point.
Exactly, and is basically forced not to dress as a woman these days.
And what they didn't say in that report is that while she didn't let the Barack see her wearing women's clothes, he did see me trying to use his mother's lipstick sometimes. That used to really crack him up. But I mean, I look, I know we can't reach out to everybody in the world, but this is someone he had a very close personal connection to. He's the first president, to, I believe, to appoint an open transgender person into his government. So it would be nice if something were done for Evie. He says, now when people call me scum, I can just say I was the nanny for the president of the United States. Well, it's been a rough life.
Yeah. We've told you about the homophobic laws being passed in various cities of Russia, including St. Petersburg. Activists there are now going to court to challenge this law.
They couldn't go until the thing was into effect for a little while.
Yeah, but given the way Russian courts have treated gay people and requests for the Pride Parade and stuff like that, I wouldn't be very hopeful.
Well, maybe the European Parliament will take them on because they issued what's called their annual enlargement process reports for Turkey, Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo, and are finding them wanting. They all want to be, part of Europe and everything, but they're doing all of them have real big problems when it comes to dealing with gay people, and they outline what they are.
Well, it's nice that the European Union is making that one of the criteria for entrance into the European Union, because they could have just said, oh, never mind, we'll take you.
But they did that. I mean, like Romania and all these other places, which are very anti-gay, have passed laws banning discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation.
Yeah,
well. Oh, yeah, we don't have that here in America, and they got it in Romania, but P.S., I ain't going there, even though that's where my people are from.
I was going to say, isn't that your homeland?
The town that my grandparents were from is now in Romania. When they left, it was just the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Okay.
In 1907.
AIDS news.
Okay.
Well, there are some really big news about AIDS this week, and that is that the Health and Human Services Department has issued new guidelines that recommend HIV treatment for everybody who is infected, even though they say you should decide on a case-by-case basis. But they think that not only do the antiretroviral drugs treat HIV, suppress the viral load, prevent opportunistic infections, they say it's also implicated in preventing heart disease, which is not listed as an AIDS-defining disease, but can work against heart disease, kidney disease, liver disease, neurologic diseases. They say the drugs are better than they used to be. They also promote a better survival rate. They do promote less transmission of HIV by suppressing the viral load. So they're saying even if you have a high T-cell count above 500, which used to be a marker, you should consider going on treatment. Now,
what about side effects?
That's the thing. They also suggest that you should watch out for side effects, for whether or not people can actually be adherent to the drugs, because if you can't maintain the regimen, then you risk making your situation worse. And then, of course, there's the cost. So all of those are things to consider. Because
there are waiting lists around the country for the ADAP program.
Yes. The waiting lists deaths, I'm happy to say, are going down a little. It used to be like up to 5,000 or 6,000. Now we're down to 3,000 or 4,000, but it's still too much. And it's because state programs can't afford to pay for the drugs for everybody. So we're not recommending that everybody go on these drugs, but what's interesting is that the government is now recommending this.
Don't you think some of the main impetus behind this is the fact that this will suppress viral loads?
Absolutely.
Wait a minute. And therefore, aid in stopping transmission of the virus.
No question about it.
I
think that is absolutely their reasoning on doing this. I think they want to use it as a prevention tool for transmission. But look into that.
Well,
all right. The Howard Brown Health Center is one of the premier LGBT health centers in the country. It's in Chicago.
And it's still going strong, but it turns out that they got a lot of AIDS money. Now, they weren't spending it on, big fancy dinners and limousines or anything, but they were spending it just for operating costs, and they were supposed to be spending it to do this research and HIV stuff, which they were not doing. So they're going to have to repay $715,000 to federal agencies to settle the claims against them. But they are ongoing. The guy who's running the thing now had nothing to do with it, and he says, we put this behind us, and we're going to get it all straightened out.
And that, in fact, they could have charged us more, but this is the agreed upon settlement because we were open and transparent in looking into this. So we're glad they're continuing to provide services and do studies and provide treatment. Right. So many nonprofit agencies do a little sleight of hand with the funds and move them around in all sorts of ways.
Not supposed to.
Of course not, but it's not uncommon.
Right. Tell me about Stanmore Cooper.
I don't know.
This is the pilot who was...
Well, he has HIV, and he didn't tell anyone he had HIV because for a long time the FAA didn't like to give licenses to pilots with HIV, but he was fine, and so he didn't tell anybody, which is very, very, very common. But eventually they found out he had HIV, so he pleaded guilty to the crime of making false statements to the government. He lost his pilot's license, and he paid $1,000 fine. But then he turned around and he sued the government for violating the Privacy Act because when they found out he had HIV, they shared this information more widely than they were supposed to.
And that's how they found out about him.
So he sued for mental anguish and violations of the Privacy Act and infliction of mental damages.
And the Supreme Court said this last week.
That he could not collect because the conservative majority found that Congress had not allowed compensation for mental anguish.
Well, suing the government in general is very difficult.
Yes. So when they said when violations of the Privacy Act of 1974 inflict no actual damage like loss of income, you can't sue. But there is a real question about what actual damages means.
Right.
And in this case, the conservative majority prevailed, and he is not winning his lawsuit. But meanwhile, the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund is suing the famous restaurant in L.A., the Ivy, for firing an HIV-positive busboy after he tested positive, was having some bad side effects from drugs, so left work early one day, asked for a little different schedule to accommodate his medical needs, and so he says, and the Ivy says, no, he was just a bad busboy, and we really didn't know he was sick until after we fired him. So this will all be sorted out in a court case, but they are suing the Ivy for HIV discrimination. Meanwhile, in L.A., they are mourning the death of Alexis Rivera, age 34, from HIV complications. She was a transgender activist and worked on services for transgender youth. She was a political lobbyist, worked on health access for transgender people. But she was in some denial about her HIV and refusing to take medications. and she died of HIV complications at age 34.
Going back to MALDEF, the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and not apropos of AIDS, we got a briefing from them down in Houston when I was there for that journalist conference, and it's something we've spoken about before, and it's all about how your votes out there are going to be limited this year. Because the right wing is passing all these laws to make it very, very hard to get to the polls, and MALDEF and NAACP and all these groups are taking the lead in trying to stop this. But you better check out, folks, whether you can vote this year, whether you're registered. Do you need a government-issued ID? And the student ID is not enough, and all those other kinds of things. Because the right wing just wants to suppress Obama's margin of victory.
They want to steal the election.
Outrageous.
Which they have done in the past.
We should just let everybody register to vote when they're born or something. I don't mean at the time of birth, but just everybody be considered registered and stop all this nonsense.
Exactly. Same-day registration and voting. And in the category of people with HIV with more privilege and access and whatever, Magic Johnson has now bought the Los Angeles Dodgers for $2 billion with his syndicate.
Wow, I'm going to be going to see Magic Bird in the weeks to come. I forget, I think it's next week. That's a play about Magic Johnson and Larry Bird.
Yes.
They were great rivals.
Yes, they were.
Of course, but friends. As well.
Yeah, and by the way, before we get to entertainment news, I just want to let you know that Free Speech TV, for those of you watching us on any of their outlets, is going into one of its pledge drives in mid-April, and our schedule will be a little different. So go to the Free Speech website at freespeech.org to check on our schedule. We should have an Eastern time, Saturday night at 11 p.m.
At least, and there'll be others.
Yeah, Monday and Friday, I think.
If you're on our email list, if you write to me, andyhum@aol.com, andyhum@aol.com, I'll put you on that email list. We'll send you the schedule, tell you what it is, but you can check it out yourself if you don't want to be on another email list.
But all we send you is one notice a week of the headlines.
Unless there's some breaking news that we think everybody should know about.
Yeah, and then we'll tell you. But the other thing that the email list gets you is a link to the podcast, the audio version of the show, and the online video.
Yeah, we got online video at freespeech.org, and we've got online video at Blip TV, so you can check them out as well.
Many, many ways to watch Gay USA. But write to Andy at andyhum@aol.com to get on our list.
Okay.
All right, entertainment news.
Well, what are we going to do about Carson Daly?
He apologized, but, I'm so sick of these apologies. These guys, it's just casual homophobia.
Yeah, but let's just talk about what he said.
He's no different from Rick Santorum in this.
Well, I mean, he was talking about the JetBlue flight where the guy went crazy, and he said most of the people on that flight were on their way to some sort of security conference in Las Vegas. It was like a bunch of dudes. And well-trained dudes, thank God. Then he says, with my luck, it would be like, this is the flight going to the Gay Pride Parade in San Francisco. I mean, that would be my colleagues. And, he says, we're headed down to Vegas for the floral convention. And he does it in a lisping gay voice. I mean, how can you not know that that's offensive in the first place?
They just think this is funny. This is so routine for them. This is the way they make jokes. I've heard gay people make jokes like this.
I don't like it.
I hate it. I hate the casual, routine homophobia. And we've got to train people out of this because it is just ugly and stupid. It is so stupid that what's his name's mother, the guy who helped take down the United flight on 9/11, the gay hero who sprang into action. Thank you, Mark Bingham.
Yeah.
His mother came out and said, "Are you kidding me? You're making jokes about gay people not being able to fight back when my son gave up his life to save so many lives on 9/11. What is the matter with you?"
Well, I'll tell you. some people, when they're not concentrating, or they're not very funny and they're not very good, fall back on stereotypes of all kinds, and they've learned to filter out certain kinds of things about African Americans, maybe, and Latinos that they don't want to do, although some still do.
Yes.
But this one they just think is okay all the time, and Jay Leno still does it. David Letterman still does it. What's that guy, the Scottish guy who's on late at night?
Colin Ferguson.
Another one. They all still do it.
That's why I don't watch anymore.
I don't. Well, exactly. Well, I watched Michelle Obama when she was on Letterman. Anyway,
maybe we can now watch Saturday Night Live again, although, man, is that a stupid show.
Yes.
But they have an out lesbian, Kate McKinnon, who is going to be a new featured player on Saturday Night Live. She was on the Big Gay Sketch show that Rosie O'Donnell produced for some years. The last out lesbian they had on Saturday Night Live was the late Denitra Vance in the mid-'80s.
Well, of course, I worked on the first season. I was a page at NBC.
Yeah.
And during the rehearsals, if they did anti-gay stuff, I would go up to like Jane Curtin and say, Jane, that's a really offensive sketch. And she goes, oh, really? Lauren Michaels likes to know about that. I'll say something in the meeting.
And then what would happen?
Well, sometimes it would be eliminated.
Oh, maybe you ought to go back there and work as a page.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a great idea. I got the jacket going here and everything.
Exactly.
Well, I got a couple of shows to let you know about. Well, I saw Jesus Christ Superstar in this Holy Week, and I'd never seen the show before. And there's some great songs in it. The staging is pretty good. But I kind of kept waiting for some songs from Godspell to come along, and they never did. So I was. It's okay. It's the Andrew Lloyd Webber thing.
Yes.
But then there's a show I love. I loved it out in New Jersey at the Paper Mill Playhouse, Newsies, which is now moved to Broadway with a book by Harvey Fierstein.
Let's start rolling the tape of Newsies.
Change coming once and for all. You makes the front page, and menu is major news. Tomorrow they'll see what we are, and sure as a star, we ain't come this far.
So, the choreography of this is wonderful. It's energetic. It's the reason, of course, I love this show is that it's the most socialist thing I've ever seen on Broadway. It's about the newsboy strike, and it's vivid. And kids.
Hey, Pajama Game was about a strike.
I know. This is a Disney show, so it's certainly aimed at somewhat at a younger audience. But I had a great time, and I'm a crab.
And you've seen it a couple of times now.
I have, and I really enjoyed it. And Jeremy Jordan is in the lead there as Jack Kelly. Remember, this was a movie 20 years ago, and as a musical with Christian Slater in that role, in the lead role. And they've reworked the book. Harvey reworked the book, and he's got a woman reporter in there who plays a major role. But I just think it's a lot of fun.
Okay, Newsies. Andy loved it. Well. Not so successwell dancing, as opposed to that, was Martina Navratilova on Dancing with the Stars.
Can't believe it. She's a great athlete and so graceful.
Maybe graceful on the tennis court, but not graceful on the dance floor. Yeah. She was the first one out, and she, I'm afraid, deserved it. And we admire her as a tennis player.
And she was the first tennis player out, too.
Loved her as a guest here on Gay USA. Come back anytime. But not good.
Well, they always say, don't play outside your sport.
Football players do well. Tennis players and ice skaters, but tennis, no, I don't think so.
I remember when Newt Rockne, there was at least in the movie, he taught his players to ballet to learn some moves. Remember that from Newt Rockne, All-American?
Yeah.
Have a happy Easter or whatever you're celebrating, folks.
And write to andyhum@aol.com to get on our mailing list, and check the freespeech.org website to check our schedule from mid-April to the beginning of May.
Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you in Unholy Week next week.
Bye.